Okay, so Protection Warrior. I want to go over a few things, and there is a lot to go over. Um, I want to go over how I got to where I am for context for a few things. So, I was playing ARMS. I switched over from ARMS. I had been messing around with ARMS. I looked at Fury, went back to ARMS, and then decided to set up protection. Wanted to do some PvP since I hadn't really done much PvP. And while I have played tank specs before in PvP, um, Warrior by far does better. So for me, it got kind of interesting at that point, whether it was the level I was at, since I was still leveling at this point, or if it was kind of the build I was using. So, um, I've been mostly doing PvP, so this is going to be mostly PvP focused. I did try to do some dungeons just to have something to compare to, and I started um, doing things on Warrior when Love is in the Air was going on. This was one of the characters I was doing the event stuff with. And so there were some other things going on at the same time. When I tried to queue for just Dragonflight dungeons, I was just getting really weird groups. Um, I tried doing some time walking, and that had um, kind of mixed results. And then finally, like the weeks changed, and I think time walking came back around again, and was finally able to actually do some dungeons. And Warrior is, um, for the most part, just a tank with warrior themed abilities. There's not really anything stand out about protection as a tank in PvE. I would say. I think that's fair. All tanks are basically about the same when it comes to like doing dungeons and things like that. You just have a few kind of flavor abilities and a few signature abilities, and that's pretty much it. So that being said, I turned my attention back to PvP. I did some or tried to do some Tollbard um, PvP. There's a really weird glitch that was going on where um, as soon as I would run in, I would get the debuff that you get when you're AFK, and the timer would start, and I would get ported out. So that did not last long. What little bit I did get to do, and the times there were, um, the opposite faction there. Um, it was the same kind of PvP um, experience as I was having in just doing random battlegrounds. So I did some world quests as I got closer to 70. Ran around the Dragon Isles, and I think that was about it. I don't have a lot of experience with Warrior. Warrior's one of the classes I probably played the least. I've messed around with all three specs at various lengths at various times, depending on what expansion and or patch we were in. Um, so I'm familiar with the basics of each spec. So that being said, I wanted to first mention before I forgot, I did some theory crafting with the stats. Um, so I had a bit of a quick succession with my gear. So when I hit 70, I had some profession gear. And then I went and gathered up my Primalist gear from the Forbidden Reach. And then, having been doing PvP while leveling, I had some honor, and you can't really spend it on anything. There's no gear or anything. I think all you can do is get the chests that have marks of honor for like 2,000 honor. Um, so I filled in with PvP gear the pieces that I was missing of the Primalist gear, to kind of make a set of gear. And then because I was doing time walking's part of the Great Vault now, so I had a couple pieces to pick from that. So that got me to the current item level that I am with a 451 PvP level. So as I was picking the PvP gear, I decided to try to prioritize my stats. And I decided on mastery, which is increases your chance to block by a percentage of your mastery, and your chance to critically block, blocking twice the amount, by the full amount of your mastery. Also increases attack power. So I decided that was probably my priority. However, not all PvP gear has. You don't get to choose what stat um, you want. Most PvP gear will have versatility. That is how they have decided to kind of balance um, PvP. So it will decrease the damage you take and increase the damage and healing that you do, which is fine. Um, so you almost always have versatility and then another stat. So sometimes mastery wasn't an option. So I'm not sure how much haste actually affects warrior. Since warriors use rage other than, outside of the global cooldown. So I decided to go with critical strike. Now, critical strike also grants parry, and I don't particularly care for parry. If you're having issues as a tank, staying alive, you probably want to stack um, a bit more parry then, until it seems like you're able to kind of survive on your own without having to pop a bunch of your cooldowns. So you'll probably want to stack critical strike. Um, I've just never really cared for it all that much. I try not to use any more of it than I need. So, with other tanks, um, I've basically done the same thing and kind of leaned into mastery a bit more. You're always going to have some parry because critical strike is on so much gear. So you'll always have kind of like a baseline amount, which is fine. You don't necessarily want to get rid of all of it. Because then you'll essentially be kind of a plate class that acts more like you're a cloth class, kind of has that effect if you end up with too little parry, which in my experience has been around about 10%. There's not really a right or wrong amount to it. Um, it's not like some of the other stats where like diminishing returns and things like that factor in. I don't believe so. Um, so I wasn't said that to say I wasn't thrilled with Critical Strike, but I knew Critical Strike would do something. So I wasn't sure again kind of how much haste overall, how much effect that would have outside of obviously like attack speed and all of that. So yeah, so that was kind of what I did. So I stacked mastery and then tried to make it a point of keeping haste and critical strike at least to as close to 15% as I could, and that seemed to work. When I started doing PvP at level 70, um, had a much greater effect. So I have been having quite a bit of fun as a tank. Even though some games all I've done is either just kind of guard a base or um, try to run the flag back to our base. When I'm able to go one on one with almost any other class. Another warrior, a rogue, um, a cloth type. The only thing I have issues with is range. So like hunters are a bit tricky. I can survive. It's a bit tricky. Um, Rogues, if I use everything, I can take away about 1/3 of their health almost immediately. I've had several in different games just vanish and kind of run off, and some will try to come back and try to reapply everything and perma stun me and all of that. Others will just kind of run off. So you definitely can stay alive long enough for someone else to come and aid you if you're guarding a base or guarding, holding the flag or something like that. So, um, yeah. So, like I said, I wanted to mention that before I forgot, before we got too far into this. So, as far as the talents go, so I'm going to go through this kind of as I made the changes. Um, so I went with a combination of Shield Slam talents and Bleed talents. I've kind of learned not to go all in on one thing. You kind of want, at the very least, you kind of want to lean in. If you lean in, you kind of want a major minor effect. Um, if you lean into one thing, you kind of want a bit of something else just to kind of round it out. Especially if you're not 100% sure how it's going to work. Um, so that was kind of what I did. Um, so a lot of the talents end up breaking down to basically that. So there's utility, which you should be somewhat familiar with if you've played Warrior before. And that's a lot of what the actual warrior talents are, just basically your utility, your abilities that they've had for I don't know how long now. There's not really very much that's new there. Um, and then the protection talents are basically your utility, so either kind of crowd control, some kind of survivability, either health or damage mitigation, and then, as I said, abilities that kind of revolve around Shield Slam, your bleed effects, what have you. So, um, to understand this a bit better, so your bleed effects are, if we look here under protection, so deep wounds. Your Devastator and Revenge also cause the enemy to bleed physical damage for 15 seconds. So that is your passive that you will always have. And then you have the option of taking Rend, which is a single target bleed that will do immediate damage and then um, damage over time. Almost everything for warriors physical damage. which is fine because that's the one of the best damage you can have in the game. And then Thunderous Roar, which is an AoE um, damage over time. So Roar explosively dealing physical damage to enemies within 12 yards and causing them to bleed physical damage over 10 seconds. So, both similar. As I said, Ren is your single target. Thunderous Roar is your AoE. And I actually really like that. I don't know. I'm pretty sure that Deep Wounds has been in the game in some form for a while. I really like how they kind of seamlessly were able to add kind of the bleed effects to your regular melee attacks. So it gives it something extra without kind of taking anything away. It's not an unholy Death Knight. It's not melee damage, just kind of spell damage, kind of a spellcaster kind of thing. Um, it is all kind of warrior focus, melee focus, but you're doing something else as part of your regular rotation. You don't have to do anything you wouldn't otherwise be doing, which is nice. So it keeps with the class fantasy, if you will. So, um, so as I said, so most of this is how I had it set up to begin with. And then if we type in slam, so those are all the ones that work with shield slam. So before I get too far ahead here, let me go over the actual ability. So you have shield slam, thunderclap, ignore pain, charge, execute, impending victory, revenge, shield charge, and thunderous roar. So those are your, at some point in time, those have been all kind of baseline abilities with the exception of shield charge, which I believe is new. So those are all your damaging abilities. Now, as far as like your utility, um, things that either mitigate damage or restore health, you have shield block, bitter immunity, shield wall, last stand. As far as like your crowd control, you have storm bolt, shockwave, demoralizing shout, and that is pretty much it. So, as far as like what works with shield slam, um, so devastate, thunderclap, revenge, and execute have a 30% chance to reset the remaining cooldown on shield slam. Using shield slam increases the damage of shield slam by 5% for 16 seconds, and it increases the block value of your shield by 3%, stacking up 5 times. Shield Slam generates 2 more rage and extends the duration of shield block by 1 second. And I'll come back to these two. Let's see here. Shield Slam deals an additional 10% damage and deals 10% increased critical strike damage. Leap through the air. Oh, I guess because it says slamming, it pulled it up, so that actually doesn't have anything to do with it. So yeah, so there you go. So as I said, kind of revolves around using shield slam, which is fine. That is your main rage generating ability. Um, and then the other thing was bleed effects. So your bleed effects have a chance to grant you 5 rage. Deep Wound Rend and Thunderous Roar's bleed effects deal 20% increased damage. Of course, Thunderous Roar. And then increases the duration of Thunderous Roar's bleed effects by 2 seconds and increases the duration of your bleed effects by 15% at all times. So I'm all but pretty sure that Thunderous Words and Bloodborne do stack. So you have a 35% increase to your bleed effects, which seems about right from what I can tell in PvP. Um, I've actually been doing pretty good damage and healing. Um, so it's kind of made playing PvP kind of new again, because you're not specifically focused on damage, you're not specifically focused on healing. Um, you're more focused kind of on surviving, basically, because I've spent quite a few games either guarding a base or trying to get a flag. So you want to survive, heal yourself, and also kind of crowd control. So, um, and then from there, so I tried initially to not take Thunderclap. I wanted to just use Revenge. I had Revenge, I had Rend. I had too many abilities that used Rage and not enough abilities that were generating Rage. So that just did not work. Um, so I broke down and took Thunderclap. And with that, I was able to take Blood and Thunder. Thunderclap deals 10% increased damage. If you have Rend, Thunderclap affects 5 nearby targets with Rend. That is broken. That is so good in PvP. If you play Shadow Priest and you're familiar with, I want to say, Vampiric Touch that also applies Shadow Word Pain if you took the talent for that, and how well that worked together, that was my thought in taking um, Blood and Thunder. It works just as well. Um, that is so good. That is why I don't have Rend on the bar. I just let use it through Thunderclap. Um, so after taking that, I went through. So at first, I didn't think I really was going to need Shield Wall because I really wasn't using it to begin with. So I went through and I swapped out Defender of Argus, which gives you an additional charge, which I just swapped this back. I took Impregnable Wall, which again deals with Shield Slam, generates Rage because I had too many abilities, not enough Rage. So I thought, well, that'll work. It does something with Shield Slam. You get Rage. The remaining cooldown of Shield Wall reduces the remaining cooldown of Shield Wall by 5 seconds. So it all seemed like it was really good. In practice, though, for PvP, it's just not. I just don't think it's quick enough. Shield Slam's not my priority. Um, in PvP, I'm using other things. I do use it. It's just not my main ability that I'm using. It's kind of a filler ability. I think it would qualify to say that. So I went ahead and switched back to Shield Wall, or to Defender of Argus, excuse me. Went back and swapped to Defender of Argus. So I had an additional charge and reduces the cooldown by 30 seconds. So I think that will work better because I have started using it more. So that makes a bit more sense. I also swapped out Battle Scarred Veteran and Violent Outburst at one point for Punish And I believe tough as nails. So punish shield slam deals 10% increased damage and reduces enemies' damage against you by 3% for 9 seconds. Multiple punishments may overlap. So uh, that works really well for PvP. I do use shield slam enough that this has a benefit, and I like the overlap part. If you see abilities that say they overlap, um, typically they're either really good depending on what the effect is, or they're just no use at all. So I had considered this to begin with, but I was a little when I saw the overlap and the shield slam. I'm like, I don't know how much I'm going to be using shield slam. Like I didn't really have anything to reference. Um, so I went with other things that I thought would be more useful. Battle Scarred Veteran is basically like a cheat death effect. Um, every tank has at least one of these. I know Demon Hunter does. Of course, Death Knight has like Purgatory, that kind of a thing. Um, and then Tough as Nails, blocking an attack deals physical damage to the attacker, ignoring armor. So physical damage is already some of the best damage you can get because it kind of already does ignore armor. And generates high threat. So the threat really doesn't matter. It did help in dungeons, um, obviously, because there's things to taunt there. But just the overall idea of blocking an attack and doing damage is just very, it's along the same lines. I was thinking as some of the abilities that will kind of bounce the dots back onto the caster kind of a thing. Um, so I just like the idea of it. And it does work well. It does work well with the mastery effect. Does work well in just general situations. So you're always going to be blocking. So you're always going to be doing a bit of damage. Um, and then what did I do? So I took at some point, I think it was a bit before I swapped things around here. I did take Devastator just because I didn't need another ability. Devastate doesn't do a whole lot of damage. I don't have it anymore. It replaces Devastator, so it won't even show me what the ability does. Um, yeah, so it just didn't really do a whole lot of damage as I remember. Um, And I kind of like the idea of just auto attack, which got me to thinking if there was anything else that did auto attack damage. So if you type in auto, there are a few things. So I kind of ran with this idea of just kind of auto attack damage. So you have War Machine. Your auto attacks generate 50% more rage. Killing an enemy instantly generates 5 rage and increases your movement speed by 30% per 8 seconds. So that's, for tank in PvP, that's good. Auto attack speed increased by 5%. I had sidearm. 20% chance to hurl a weapon at the target and 3 other enemies in front of you, dealing an additional physical damage. I had this when I kept checking recount at different times. The damage was so low, it just didn't really seem like it was worth it. And it was almost exactly the same every time I was checking it. So it wasn't like I just had a bad dungeon run or, just didn't do that much damage in PvP that one game or something like that. Like it was consistent. So I swapped it out at the time for I believe it was Uproar reduces Thunderous Roar's cooldown. Um, And haste increased by 2%. Your auto attack critical strikes increase your auto attack speed by 20% for 10 seconds. So kind of everything together works uh, works well. Critical strike. There we go. And shield charge increases your auto attack. Okay, so shield charge, critical strike chance, and critical strike damage increased by 20%. Your shield charge increases your auto attack damage and speed by 20% for 20 seconds. So, as I said, I believe this is a new ability or newer ability. So charge to an enemy with your shield, dealing physical damage to it and physical damage to all enemies within 10 yards. Also stuns the primary target for 4 seconds. So, as part of my initial thinking of trying to use Ren as just the AoE ability, I also thought I could use shield charge in place of charge. That just did not work. Mostly because it has a 45-second cooldown. So, for arms, I took Skull Crusher, Skull Splitter. Um, and it also had a 45-second cooldown, so it was kind of a not a situational ability, but kind of a one um, kind of a one-time use in combat ability kind of a thing, usually. So since this had a 45-second cooldown, it was kind of the same thing. I just stuck it in kind of the same spot because that's where I was familiar with that ability being. And I actually find it's better to use it in melee range rather than trying to charge. Um, which is a bit weird. But it does seem to work better in melee range. So I actually think using charge just as you normally would, and then just kind of saving this for just kind of as your rotation, I think actually works better. Um, I have noticed Warrior overall it works very clunky if you haven't noticed. I think they could try and maybe revisit tweak some talents, if not abilities, and kind of streamline some things. If you haven't noticed, and you'll notice that as I keep going, like there's especially with like the mitigation abilities, like there's quite a few that could probably be condensed down. Um, I like the concept of shield charge. It just what I thought I would use it for and what I'm using it for are kind of two different things. And then from there, let me see here. What did I do? I think from there as I leveled, I just kind of filled talents in. So I took Violent Outburst back, which just causes, so it stacks up and then causes your Shield Slam or Thunderclap to deal increased damage, generate more rage, and grant ignore pain. Um, yeah, so one more thing I wanted to mention in the talents, or actually two more things. So, most people will probably already know this if you've played Warrior. Impending Victory just replaced Victory Rush. You kind of don't have a choice because it's so far um, up in the tree there. So, um, as not to cause confusion. Um, there's that. And then I did want to mention as far as like execute, there are two abilities that I think are kind of default to take. Sudden Death and Massacre. So, Sudden Death, your attacks have a chance to make your next execute cost no rage, be usable on any target regardless of their health, and deal damage as if you spent 40 rage. So, you can So you have a choice between 20 to 40 rage, and I believe that determines the amount of damage. I think the restriction of only usable on targets below such and such health, I think that remains the same. I think it's just mainly the damage. And then execute is now usable on targets below 34% health. So both of those I would say are, as I said, kind of mandatory to take. You can never go wrong with Warrior. This is one of the first things I learned. You can never go wrong with Warrior with taking things that work around execute. Like they have always, um, regardless of what our talents look like, they've always had things in the game. Like those two talents I have taken more times. They've always had things that revolved around execute. So, um, I think that is more or less it. To further my point, real quick about how you know it's warriors kind of clunky, kind of has kind of multiples of the same abilities. So while I understand, as a tank, you're going to have abilities that kind of do somewhat of the same thing that you're supposed to use sparingly throughout the encounter. Um, I was kind of two minds with. So first of all, you have shield wall and shield block, and then you also have last stand and bitter immunity, which both kind of do the same thing respectively. Um, just on with shield wall and shield block, it's a matter of one costs rage, one doesn't, and kind of the duration and how much they block and things like that. They still essentially do the same thing. Um, there's that, and then specifically with Last Stand, it increases health by 30% for 15 seconds and instantly heals you for that amount. Bitter Immunity restores 20% health and removes all disease, poisons, and curses. So they're both restoring health. It's just one is increasing maximum health. So the health part is the same. Um, it's just one's increasing health, one's removing diseases, poisons, and curses. They're just very similar, and I don't see why we need two abilities for this. You could combine these together, especially when you also add in Berserker Rage, which also removes fear, saps, and incapacitating effect. Like it's getting. I understand like there's a specific purpose for each one of these, but you could also streamline these in so they work a bit more efficiently together. Because I'm using way too many abilities. I feel like. Um, which I'll go over what I actually use, kind of what my rotation is here momentarily. But it just, to me, I was like, I have bitter immunity for arms, and it's perfectly fine. I can use it for health, or I can use it for it's kind of to remove the diseases, poisons, curses, what have you. Um, I kind of have a choice there. It's on a 3-minute cooldown. Um, when then you're throwing in Last Stand, so there's another ability to worry about, and they both have fairly long cooldowns. Again, I understand the point of a tank is you need things to use throughout the battle. The Also the point of a tank is to have things that you can kind of cycle through. So you can use something, and then if you have to use something else later, and then maybe something else later, eventually you need to go back to be able to use the first thing. You can't just keep constantly using different abilities. And that's kind of where I feel like we're at with this. It's really there's no kind of one focus on one thing outside of the kind of what I went over. Like you use Shield Slam, you use Bleeds. Outside of that, it's like they weren't exactly clear. And your mastery also, just don't forget, is perfectly fine. Your mastery will do a lot of the work as far as keeping you alive. There's a reason Death Knights don't have a lot of other abilities that heal or do damage mitigation, because their mastery is doing a lot of the work. Um, so yeah, so that was my little rant on that. So as far as my actual rotation, as far as what I'm actually using, so I came to Skyhold, to the version of Valhalla in the game here, to show you. So I will open with Thunderclap, which, as you see, applies Thunderclap, Rend, Deep Wounds. There you get Punish. Now we can use Execute 2 times. I use Shield Slam 3 times. So I will use Thunderclap, as I said. Now, from here, I'll do one of 2, maybe 3 things. Depending on what the target is, as far as like what class they are. I'll almost always stun first. Use Shield Wall. I might use Last Stand. If I have a Health Stone, I might use that instead and try to save Last Stand. But then typically I will use Thunderous Roar. So Thunderclap, Shield Wall, so Thunderous Roar, and then this is where I'll use Shield Charge. That seems to be where it works best, is in melee range. And then from there, it's pretty much rinse and repeat. I'll occasionally use Ignore Pain. Ignore Pain does not stack, it just refreshes the duration. So, what I figured out, the best way to make efficient use of your rage is to use Ignore Pain and then use a charge of Shield Block. Kind of stack those. So, I don't do that as much in PvP, but that was kind of what I figured out when I was doing dungeons. I seem to remember a point where Ignore Pain actually did stack. At some point. So then from there, as far as PvP goes, so Thunderclap, occasionally use Ignore Pain. I will typically, once Stormbolt wears off, I'll use Shockwave. If I haven't already used Demoralizing Shout, I'll use that. And then pretty much just rinse and repeat. So what I find I'll do is Shield Wall and Last Stand will be kind of what I use at the opening of combat. And then I will save Shield Block and Bitter Immunity for kind of the later or end part of combat. And then now that I've got when I got my PvP gear, I got trinkets. So of course I got the one trinket that removes loss of control, and then for the other I got the one that increases health, because that seemed to make the most sense. So I'll kind of save this for end of combat. It's very situational with any of the damage mitigation or the healing, because you're never quite sure like what you're going to be up against. But that is roughly what I've been doing. I spam Thunderclap, Stun, Shield, Heal, Thunderous Roar. Like I said, I'm taking like 1/3 of a rogue's health, like just straight out of the gate, just doing that. Shield Slam and Execute are kind of hard to use if people are bouncing around, which they tend to do quite a bit in PvP. A lot of them, though, will just stand and just try to straight, 1v1 me. So it's not that, not all that difficult. So, yeah. I really only get maybe one use of Storm Bolt, one use of Shockwave, and then either I'm gonna die, or somebody else has gotten to wherever I am if I'm guarding a base to help me. People have actually been really good about being coordinated in PvP lately. So. As I said though, kind of just rinse and repeat. Like, I can stay alive for for a little bit anyway. Like, I don't just instantly die. I am not good in situations where I'm outnumbered. That could be said of about any class. But usually, if there's one or two, I can usually stay alive for at least a few moments. Kind of pop my mitigation, crowd control, all of that. So yeah. So I think you get the general idea of it. So again, like the bleed effects, I like the bleed effects. I like that idea. That with the crowd control and everything makes it fun to play in PvP. So I'm gonna keep going with that. I might try to do some rated, even though it's getting to be the end of the season and everything, just to see. So yeah. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope that was helpful for you. And thank you for watching.